On today's episode, we're going to talk about the rotate tool. So rotate tool is kind of like the move tool in that it's going to move some objects, but it's very distinct in that it's going to rotate those around a very particular axis. Plus it has some other kind of interesting ways to be able to use it and utilize it for our modeling in SketchUp. And just like our move tool, we're going to also talk about copying and making copies and making external and internal arrays with it. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you see here, we have a clock that I just quickly drew up here in SketchUp, and our our rotate tool is going to be located in our move tool. So once I click on that, it's going to be right here as our second choice. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And one of the first things you need to realize is that when using the rotate tool, you're going to notice that it likes to orientate itself based off of the surface that you are working in. So this can kind of be a little tricky later on, but note that there is ways to be able to inference lock this and whatnot. But let's show you actually how to use this before getting into all that. So if I want to rotate my minute and hour hands here, what I'm going to want to do is click once to set up my axis point on my rotate tool. So in this case, I'm just going to infer to the center of this arc here. So I'm going to hover over this for 2 seconds and be able to infer to the center of that. So I click once to be able to set up my protractor here on my rotate tool. So that establishes the axis in which my object is going to end up rotating. Okay. So in this case, I'm now going to draw out my axis arm where I'm going to end up clicking a second time in order to pick up my object that I will be rotating. So in this case, I'm just going to come out here to the end point right there, and I'm going to click a second time. So now I've picked up that object, and now it's going to allow me to rotate that around that axis point like so. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do. Nothing really overly complicated there. And then I would click a third time in order to set down my object and complete that task. Okay, we can obviously go in and pre-select an object just like we would do with some other tools. And again, I could snap to this center point here, click once to establish that axis point, and come out here and click a second time in order to pick up that object, and obviously now I can rotate that as well. Now with other tools, we could also be accurate with the rotate tool, but in this case we're not really measuring in inches or feet from a particular point. We're going to be measuring in degrees. So in this case, let's pretend this is my 0 degree, and I wanted to rotate this around to, let's say, 90. So once I click a second time to pick it up and start rotating, but before I click a third time to set it down, I'm going to enter in my angle that I would like it to be moved from. So I'm going to type in 90. There is no qualifying measurement that I would need to put in, like inches or feet, for degrees. So I would just hit enter at that point. And then based off of where I picked it up from, it's going to measure out 90 degrees and then set that down in the proper spot. Okay? So that's kind of the rotate tool in a nutshell. Okay? However, let me go ahead and orbit over here, because we want to distinguish some ways to be able to use the rotate tool on any surface or plane. As we said earlier, my rotate tool tends to like to orientate itself based off of the surface that's on here. So if I come here and I have like a cone, it might be challenging to be able to lock this in the blue axis going up and down, right? Might not like that. So what I need to end up doing then is coming over here, and I I could highlight it on the surface itself. By doing that, it kind of locks it in with a purple. But I could also lock in a particular plane by coming off the object, holding shift. Now I've locked that in the blue plane, and I can then select my object. You know what, we're going to have to pre-select my hand there. Hold shift, so I locked it into blue, and now I can come in the top of this cone and establish my axis at that point. I can obviously let go of my shift key at this point because I set it down, it's placed, it's not going to be moving, and I can come in here and do my normal rotate function as I have done previously. Okay, and that can obviously work in any plane. So if I'm over here, I can lock that in the green plane, right? So as I move it around, so on and so forth. So we want to be very distinct in where and how we lock things in, because again, if I'm in the green and I'm coming out here and grabbing this object, it's going to rotate it based off of where I've set that center point. So if you're not getting it in the right plane, or you're not putting it in the right spot, when you set down the protractor, it might not necessarily rotate in the way that you want it to. So be very, very specific about that. Okay. As an instance here, we'll come in here. We got a bank vault, and I would want to make sure that I'm lining up with the hinges on this. So I'll pre-select my door, okay, and then I can zoom in, grab my rotate tool, find the center of this hinge, click once to set that down, and again I want to drag out my arm here in alignment or parallel with my door. Click a second time to pick that object up, and now that'll allow me to rotate this door open like so. So now we have just opened the door to the bank vault. We can get in and get all the money. So that's kind of fun, huh? Okay, next we can show you that the rotate tool not only can be locked in a particular plane, but as we are setting down the protractor of our rotate tool in an area, we can drag it out to be able to orientate itself to a very specific direction. So for instance, we're going to make a paper airplane here real quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, you know what, I didn't have a good selection there. There we go. Alright, I'm going to select that, and you'll see here that I'm going to go on the end point here, okay? I'm going to click and hold, okay? And then I'm going to end up dragging my mouse cursor out. And you can see here that now I can move that protractor tool around, okay? In order to align myself with my particular plane that I want to fold this on, and I let go. Okay, and then I come out here and say, okay, this is the angle I'm going to go with, and I can now fold that up. Let's go 75 degrees, like so. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that again. So I'm going to come in here and grab that rotate tool, click and hold, drag it along this axis, let go. Okay, so that established the orientation of my protractor tool. As I'm setting it down, I'm then going to click a second time. So this is the angle that I'm picking it up at, and as I move up, I'm going to go 75 degrees again. So there's part of my fold for my paper airplane. I'm then going to come in here like so. Okay. And then again, rotate tool, but this time I'm going to rotate it against this axis line. Okay. And then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to fold that down like so. Okay, so that was 60 degrees. Alright. Again, I'm going to grab that selection there. Click and hold, drag it against this fold line that I want to make. Okay, come in here, fold it down, 60, enter. Okay, and the last part here is that. Click and hold as I drag. I establish my protractor tool there. And there's that. And then we'll go ahead and get this other side as well. Click, drag, let go. And, well, there we go. And that is how you can fold a paper airplane in SketchUp using the rotate tool. Pretty cool stuff. Alright, last thing that we want to talk about here is how to make copies with the rotate tool. And it's very similar to the move tool. Actually, it's the same exact way to do it with as the move tool. So here I have my column. I would pre-select that. Again, come in here with my rotate tool. I'm going to click once to establish my axis. Come in here and pick up a second with a second click my object, and as I'm rotating this around, I hit the control key, and as you can see now I've established, or I've set down my original piece, and now I'm rotating a copy of that, and I can rotate this out to, let's say, right here. Okay, let's say we want 15 degrees. I hit enter. I'm setting that down. Okay, so that's how you would make a copy. And just like with the move tool, before I do anything else, I can now make my array. So in this example, we're going to make an external array. So if I say I want 15 copies, 15x, and again, SketchUp is going to look at the angle at which you set down your copy with, and it's going to extrapolate that externally. So now I have 15 copies arced around the rotate tool and my axis point that I set down. Okay, and again, we can always add more if we need to. So I can go 20, or I could go less, 10, 12, or even fewer than that, 5. All right, and that's how. And then once I click on another tool and click off of that, I can no longer edit that array. So we have to be very careful that we set or complete it before we click on anything else. So that was an external array, and again, just like with our move tool, I'm going to pre-select that, come in here like so, click once to establish my radius, click a second time to pick up my object, and this time I'm going to go 180 degrees. Oops, I forgot to make a copy. Okay, hit control to make that copy, 180 degrees. Okay, let me rotate around here so it's a little easier to see. And before obviously I do anything else, I'm going to now make an internal array by telling the computer, hey, this I want 5 spots, / enter, and now it divides up 180 degrees, so then that way you have 5 blanks between the first one and your copy. And again, just like before, I can always edit that, make it 8, I could make it 2, I could make it 15. Okay, and it's spacing that out as best as it can. Let's go just 10. There, that looks good. And once again, if I click out of that, it prevents me from going back in and changing that. So lots of stuff to kind of pick up with what we learned on this particular tool. So we learned how to establish your axis by clicking once with the rotate tool, going out a second time in a second click to pick up your object, and then you're rotating, and then a third click will then obviously set that down. Okay, we taught you how to hold shift to be able to inference lock that rotate tool in a particular plane, so then that way you can obviously move it accordingly and have it as a good selection. We also want you to get in the habit of pre-selecting your objects. We showed you how to orientate the protractor tool or establish that axis point by clicking and holding and then dragging for your first click. And then once you obviously let go, you can pick things up with your second and set things down with your third object or third click. And then finally we showed you how to make a copy with the different arrays with the rotate tool, just like our move tool. So go ahead, get in there, play around with SketchUp, just kind of rotate with a bunch of stuff and see if you can do some of these fancier things that I was able to do. See if you can make that paper airplane. See if you can make a clock or a bank vault, and then rotate that open. Alright, thanks so much for watching. We'll guys catch you on the next episode.